Welcome, everyone. Thanks for being with us today. I put a link in the chat for more information about empowering small Minnesota communities and round two applications. Please head to the ESMC website. My name is Tori Aaron, and I am a research fellow for the Minnesota Design Center at the University of Minnesota. Thanks for being here for our first Empowering Small Minnesota Communities project webinar with our special guests, Carrie Christensen and John A. Chapman. For this ESMC webinar, I will be introducing the program, and that will be followed by two separate presentations within the topic of stormwater management. We will then leave time for questions for Carrie and John about the work presented today. The Empowering Small Minnesota Communities Project, or ESMC, was established by the state of Minnesota during the 2023 legislative session to support small Minnesota communities and local government units with an added capacity to develop and better coordinate more resilient, sustainable, and adaptable infrastructure projects. The Minnesota Design Center, or MDC, is working with the Center for Transportation Studies, the Humphrey School of Public Affairs, and the Regional Sustainable Development Partnership at the university to lead this initiative. Through asset-based research and design thinking, we assist communities to think more creatively about resilient social, physical, and economic infrastructure in response to existing community assets, aspirations, needs, challenges, and previous work. Design thinking can create a community strategy that moves the community forward and identifies individual fundable projects that support that strategy. We want to provide communities involved or interested in the ESMC program with accessible perspectives on these strategies. So our webinar series aims to give a better sense of the possibilities with examples from professionals in the field. Now on to our guests. Carrie Christensen, thanks for being here. Her work in design, planning, education, and community engagement falls at the intersection of equity and the environment. She has a master's of landscape architecture from the University of Minnesota and a BA in urban studies from Stanford University. Her work is cross-sector and combines facilitation, community organizing, project management, planning, and environmental design process. She's a published author, adjunct faculty at the university, a 2001 Fulbright Scholar, and a 2010 Creative Community Leadership Institute Fellow. She's consulted with communities across the country around strategic planning, creative community engagement, and resilient design. She is also the owner of Landbridge Ecological and a senior planner at the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board, where she works on policy, design, and community engagement. Our second guest, John A. Chapman, is an associate research professor at the University of Minnesota Department of Bioproducts and Biosystems Engineering, and he also serves as a director of erosion and stormwater management certification. He holds a PhD in civil engineering from the University of Minnesota, an MS degree in civil engineering, and a BS degree in geological engineering from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He served as the president of the Minnesota Erosion Control Association and as the president of Tau Beta Pi Engineering Honor Society in the Twin Cities since 2015. He's provided leadership in Minnesota Stormwater Steering Committee and was instrumental in establishing the Minnesota Stormwater Research Council. We have a lot of talent here today, so thank you both. John, if you could get us started, that would be amazing.
Let me just get this set up here. Okay, so thank you for that excellent introduction. So I'm going to just talk about some basics of rainwater runoff and stormwater management. And I've titled this Rain, Rain, Go Away, and what to do about it. So I want to start off just by thinking about the water that we have here. This is an image courtesy of the United States Geologic Survey, and the blue dot, the little marble you see, is all the water on Earth ever. The smaller 2 dots are all of the liquid fresh water, so that's groundwater, lakes, and rivers. And then that tiny little blue dot, it's just like a little period punctuation, is just the freshwater lakes and rivers. And I think it's just absolutely amazing that all the water on this planet has just been reused over and over again for millions of years. And that's really all that there is that we have. This figure is not from the USGS. This is one created by a 3rd grade student. And it's just this idea that the water cycle is taught in most elementary school curriculum. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of this story of a raindrop when we think about a raindrop and where it goes and what happens to it. And I specifically want to focus in on the part of this kind of recycling system where the water gets recycled. And as I just said, it's all the water we've ever had. It just goes through this evaporation precipitation cycle over and over again. And I'm really going to focus in on where that raindrop hits the land and what happens to it. And that's going to be the bulk of this presentation. So that raindrop might fall onto a forest like we see here on the left-hand side of the screen. It could land on trees and leaves, vegetation, loose soils. The raindrop might travel slowly, getting caught or abstracted into little puddles. It may take hours for that raindrop to move around. And it might end up soaking into the ground and getting into a groundwater aquifer. Or it could end up landing in an area like we see here on the right, where you have pavement and buildings and compacted soils. The raindrop is potentially going to travel faster. It doesn't have an opportunity to soak into the ground. It will maybe pick up more pollutants that we've introduced in our built environment. And then either way, eventually the raindrop will flow into our streams and wetlands and lakes and rivers. And so it's just kind of impressing this idea that when we change the land, we change how that raindrop travels. And that can result in, whether we've done logging or agriculture or building cities, but we might have increased runoff or more frequent flooding, more severe flooding. We could be decreasing our infiltration to those groundwater aquifers. So we'll have less groundwater recharge that can affect the base flow in streams. We also might generate more pollutants that would naturally be on the land that will end up into our waters. And so as that raindrop travels, it may pick up some traveling companions or pollutants, as I was just getting at. Some things like fertilizer are applied to our soil in order for us to grow our food or our lawns. And if the soil and plants don't use all that, the extra will typically wash off and end up in our lakes and rivers and fertilize the plants there. And that can result in an algae bloom like we see in this image. Some algae blooms can be toxic to us and our pets. And sometimes this unbalancing of the vegetation can result in, severe ecosystem damage or fish kills, some of these things. Phosphorus is one of the elements in fertilizer that's a common problem. Nitrogen is another one of these nutrients that can be a problem. And so these are, we call them pollutants, and they're bad almost because of an overdose. If you think of it like a medicine, that the proper dose might be beneficial to us, but if there's too much, it will cause harm. And so that's one aspect of a pollution type that we have with our stormwater. So if something like fertilizer is attached to the soil and the soil erodes and is moved into a lake, then we've also fertilized that lake, and you could have the impacts that I just talked about. And that does happen a lot. So not only would we lose our good growing soils, but we're also maybe filling in the lake with soil or transporting chemicals or other things into the lake. And so soil erosion and soil management is a huge part of stormwater management. And again, some of our soil in our lakes is natural. And what I'm talking about here is a problem is when we have an overdose, where we haven't managed our land well and you have excessive erosion. And then there's other pollutants too. And maybe you've heard of things like PFAS or PAHs or oils, petroleum. Even road salt can be a problem when we're using it for road, ice management, and the excess or all of it gets washed into our lakes. And so it's a challenge for us to get some of those pollutants out of the water, and it's expensive. And it's an interesting connection that clean water requires energy, and energy production typically needs water as well. So it's a cycle that's very energy intensive. And just another photo of soil, just kind of demonstrating. This is one I took showing how kind of dynamic a raindrop impact can look at that soil level, where the soil particles might move up to 3 feet, and all of the pollutants that are attached on those would also be traveling there. So it's an important thing to think about with stormwater management. How much pollution is too much? And that's a great question, and it depends really on what we're doing. Drinking water needs to be very clean. Swimming water also needs to be very clean. Fishing, if we're consuming the fish, also needs to be very clean. Some fish don't need really clean water to survive. They can thrive in questionable water quality. Some industrial uses can take advantage of poor water quality. And so it's a interesting balance of understanding how we're using the water and using that as a driver for how clean it really needs to be. And that is an issue when you think about some of these emerging pollutants, like I just mentioned, like the PFAS, where we may not know that much about it right now. So we don't know what a safe level is, or we need to, do more research to really understand how it's persisting in our environment and how to remove it. So that can be a huge challenge when we have a new product or a new pollutant that's discovered. And the idea of pollution prevention, of just stopping using a pollution or a pollutant or grabbing it as soon as we spill it on the ground, is really, it's a key message to understand. That tends to be the most cost-effective way to protect our water resources, is by grabbing that pollutant right away. I'd mentioned road salt. That's something that's an interesting challenge, that once that salt gets into our lakes, it really doesn't ever leave. There's no real natural process that will consume that salt. And so it tends to just build up over time. And so it's one of these pollutants that we might best manage by understanding how to use less of it. And there are trainings available right now on proper salt management, where you're not using more than you have to, and really trying to limit how much you're placing on the ground. And that makes a lot of sense, because so many pollutants are probably best managed by just using less of them. And that's kind of the start of what we can do. And that pollution prevention is so important. You think about a pollutant from history like DDT, right? It was a pesticide, and we learned after we used it for a while that it was so bad that it really wasn't safe to use anywhere. So we banned the use of it. And that was probably the best way to manage that. But other times we can come up with a treatment process or a new design methodology that can help us manage our pollution. Earlier, I pointed out that changing the land affects how the raindrop travels. So sometimes, if we just design things a little bit differently, that can go a long way to giving us good stormwater management. You see these two images. It's kind of the same house in the same location with two different types of land use, where we have less of the disturbance on the left. We have more of the native vegetation retained. The natural grading is retained on the left. And all of this will help, if you think it back to that raindrop, that raindrop and the travel of that raindrop. On the image on the left, it really isn't going to see much different scenarios once we put that house in with that sort of land use. So that's one approach. And in a real photograph, you might have something like this, where they've tried to achieve that, where they've clustered development together and left a large buffer between the development and the water resource. That also results in less road pavement, less utility disturbance. So we have more natural soil conditions, and that can all benefit stormwater management. And if you think about that, raindrop travel is going to feel similar to what it was naturally because of these design changes that we've done. Another approach, kind of on the small scale, you think about a downspout coming off of a garage roof. As you see in this picture, that water is going to be moving onto the pavement, from the pavement into the street, and then into a storm drain pipe. And it has no opportunity to really interact with the soils or the groundwater. And so it might just cause a flooding problem downstream, for your neighbor, because naturally it would have moved a little slower and soaked into the ground. And this might be a correction that's just a point of turning that downspout a different direction. And so the water will flow into the grass and irrigate the grass. And it would be less, water that we need to do that sort of thing to maintain that vegetation. And so something as simple as thinking about those downspouts can be part of your stormwater management. Beyond smarter planning and construction, sometimes we also have to create treatment systems. And stormwater is often treated using a passive system where gravity moves the water. And that's different from like a wastewater treatment plant that's actively pumping water around and doing things. Stormwater passive systems would either use a settling process like we see here on the left, or a filtering process that I've shown with the coffee filter on the right. And in each of these, we're trapping pollutants or sand or sediment in this example. And so a stormwater pond is using that settling technique where we're holding the water, gravity pulls the sand down to the bottom, and then it basically stays there at that location. And just like a trash can, it will eventually fill up and it will need to be emptied. A rain garden, like we see here, is really using that filter process where the water will pass into the soil, and that soil will filter the pollutants. They'll end up incorporated into the soil. And this works really great if you have a pollutant like a nutrient, like phosphorus, that the soil and the vegetation might consume. Because the maintenance for this, if it's a consumed pollutant that the plants are using up, might almost be more of a sustainable scenario. But there is often still maintenance involved. And then these two systems can look all sorts of different ways. We can put them under roads and alongside streets and in different places. This is another photo along a highway where they've made little infiltration areas in the ditch. These can be placed under parking lots, as we have with these sorts of products here, where the water is brought through a pipe and placed underground, and then it soaks into the ground from there. It could even be the parking lot surface itself. And here we have pervious pavements where the water can actually pass through that pavement surface. And then underground, it's going to be stored into some sort of a chamber. It might be a rock-filled void space that holds the water until it can be soaked into the ground or used elsewhere. Sometimes we'll take trees and funnel our stormwater to the tree roots where they can consume it and use it. And it's just an irrigation system. And so that's another approach. And so in summary of stormwater management, our best thing is to really remove the pollutants that we can as soon as possible, or just learn to use a different sort of item. And road salt is an example that there's a lot of research looking at alternative de-icing elements that can be managed a little bit better than the sodium chloride. We can build smarter. As I showed in some of these photos, we can change our layout of our buildings or our landscapes and do stuff that helps stormwater to be more manageable. And then we can also treat the water, build a system that provides passive treatment. And then the last thing that I really haven't touched on yet is maintaining the systems. That maintenance is so important on all of this. As I said before, our stormwater ponds are really like trash cans. And at some point, we're going to have to take out the trash. And so this is an example of a pond clean out where it's a significant cost. It's a significant effort. But even small rain gardens also need to be maintained. And there's effort that goes into those beyond the gardening of the plants and these sorts of things. A lot of the other features that I talked about, the porous pavements will require a specialty street sweeper and a lot more street sweeping. These underground systems, often you need special Vector trucks and extra training for inspection and some of these things. So it's all needed to keep the system working. That maintenance is so important. And I think I'm about out of time. So I just want to say that the clean water is the goal, and keeping pollutants out of our waters can be done in so many ways, from better planning and design to better maintenance. And I've given you a glimpse, kind of the tip of the iceberg here. And I hope that you'll continue to learn about stormwater and what we can do to keep it clean. So thank you.
Thanks so much, John. That was a really great overview of stormwater management techniques. And hopefully we can have you back to talk about more in depth about snow and salt maintenance. So, all right, Carrie, we are ready for you. We'll take some questions from participants after Carrie's presentation.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. Great to be here. Thanks, John, for the wonderful reminder of why stormwater management is so important. I work for the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board as a senior planner, and thanks to Tori for the invitation to come and share a little bit about how stormwater management shows up in city making and park development processes here locally in Minnesota. So while we are not a small community, we certainly, I think this is an example that will resonate for anyone that loves to garden and loves to just be in green open space. It's a story of a park called Bridalveil Gardens. It's about an acre in size, and one of our more recent parks, we, as you may know, the Minneapolis Park Board is a separate government agency from the city of Minneapolis. We work in collaboration with the city of Minneapolis a lot, but we are very unique in that way across the country even. We've got over 150 parks. So again, we are a big system, but this is one small story in that big system. Here it all started, I'm a planner, and so Drew is a landscape architect, and we look at a lot of things in plan view and dream about the potential of them. And this is how this project started, was thinking about integration into a district stormwater system, and I'll talk more about what that is. And that was developed by the Mississippi Watershed Management Organization. For anyone that has had the good luck of working with a watershed organization, they're an amazing partner in Minnesota and very unique to this state. they offer funding and technical assistance. They also do offer, regulatory services for managing and monitoring stormwater and compliance with stormwater ordinances and requirements in our state. So super grateful to them for all that they've done. And this particular sub-watershed is called Bridal Veil Creek Sub-Watershed, and it is the sub-watershed of the Mississippi. So the Mississippi Watershed Management Organization partnered with us on this project, and as well as a developer, and we developed this small park within a larger district. You can see the Bridal Gardens Park is sort of to the lower left of this district. And I'm actually hopefully taking the next stages of this project to our board in just a couple of weeks. So it's been over 7 years of collaboration, slow development of this integrated stormwater and parkland and trails and development effort. And it all falls in this even bigger part of our system, which is the Grand Rounds. And the Grand Rounds is our parkway system. It emerged as our city grew. So starting in the 1880s, the Grand Rounds were set aside as linear parks connecting the river and the lakes and creek. They are also, a regional trail, and they offer also roadway throughout the park. And there's a missing link of the Grand Bounds, which runs right through this Bridal Veil Gardens. And so it's also part of this larger transportation network. And so when we think about parkland and all the different stacking of functions that happens, it's such an exciting part of managing stormwater, sort of bringing that in as one of these stacked functions in park creation. So the park that I'm talking about today, Bridal Veil Gardens, falls in the Towerside district. So as you look toward the south end there in that segment, very close to the University of Minnesota, actually. And this is even zooming out even more. This is have graphic representing that Grand Rounds, that parkway system is the green line. And then the pink shaded area represents the missing link. So towards the south end of that again is where this Bridal Veil Gardens is located. And
Miriam, can I just stop you for 1 second? Your audio is a little bit choppy, but when you move toward the screen, it sounds a lot clearer.
Okay, so I'll stay close. Is that better?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. All right, so one of the important parts of park planning is thinking about all of the different landowners and land managers. We acquired this site from a developer who acquired it from another developer, but it's also, there's city right of way, and then there's a light rail easement, all sort of overlapping into this park. There's also the University of Minnesota land to the north. And so jurisdictionally, it's a complex space, and that's part of the negotiation with any project like this. And this actually represents the parcel that we purchased and turned into parkland, but it was thanks to community that we had a light rail system built here a decade ago, and thanks to community that advocated hard to bring parkland adjacent to that light rail system, the developer that bought this parcel originally was required to sign a form saying, "I will turn this into parkland." And so there actually in that acquisition process, there were some stipulations by the land seller based on community organizing. So I come into this park design process 7 years after those papers had been signed, and it's an exciting kind of invisible layer of this work, and that I think needs to be celebrated is all the community advocacy that goes in to not only park making, but also keeping our water systems clean and healthy. And so I just wanted to kind of, it looks like a parcel map, but it represents so much more to me. So fast forward, after the land was sold and the district is starting to develop, there are a number of different developers. And one of the things in the city of Minneapolis, there's a requirement for stormwater fees. So if you create impervious surface in a development, like rooftop, parking lots that are not pervious, you actually pay fees. And so there's a lot of incentive to manage your stormwater on site and create interesting ways to really have that water infiltrate through the earth or be captured and be reused. There's actual financial incentives. And so a number of developers were convened by the Mississippi Watershed Management Organization, and they said, let's figure out a way to treat everyone's stormwater together and then actually reuse that stormwater for the things that we need, like watering our landscape when it's dry. Maybe we need a car wash at a local gas station, sort of thinking about what are some innovative ways to use water if we were to capture it. So again, the Mississippi Watershed Management Organization brought together, I think it was 6 developers, and designed a system for collecting stormwater off of 6 different buildings in this district. And all of that water flows into this collection tank, this underground stormwater storage system. And it comes in through rooftops, it comes in, some of it through infiltration, through the earth, a whole variety of ways. Then this space also doubles as parkland. And then we come in and develop even more parkland right next to it. And you can see here the district. So those rooftops that are up towards the top right of this image, those are actually, the stormwater from those rooftops is coming down and it's getting stored in the underground water tank under the park. And then that water is pumped up to a UV filter in this great little plaza. So you can see the UV filter is actually being put in into a picnic shelter. And it's in this shelter that, again, it sort of doubles as a gathering space. It's actually a garden storage shed as well. And there's a filter in there that filters the water and brings it up to the standard that's required for use for things like watering a community garden. So you'll see we have one of the things that we developed in the park was a community garden. And now we are able to water those community garden plots with stormwater. So it's a really exciting kind of thinking about that very, very urban condition in this situation. But I think it applies across any context where it's just stacking those functions of stormwater management into community building, into food production, into parkland. We also water the lawn at the park with the stormwater. Then I'll just end with this slide, which is my future work. And this is another part right across the transitway from Bridalveil Gardens. Is this proposed park lot. And then a linear trail and another additional park. And we'll do even more stormwater management and park development in this larger district. So stay tuned, and we're very excited to have even more coming online in the next year or two. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much for sharing, Carrie. I'm just going to give folks access if they would like to ask questions, be part of a conversation about stormwater with Carrie and John. I think I got everyone here.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely. Thanks for being here, Richard.
Oh, thank you. Both presentations were excellent. I learned different things from both, so thank you, John and Carrie. So my question we live in the northern section of Minnesota. So I look at us as the initial caregivers to the water flow. But I don't think we take the same care into planning that you folks do in the cities. Oops, I just dropped something. I apologize. But I think we could start doing that. And I've seen it in some of my own practices, but I think we could do it with some municipalities. So I don't know whether I framed a question or not more than the statement, but I guess the question would be, are we looking at northern municipalities that may see large growth factors and how they may be handling their stormwater runoff? There's my question.
And I can jump in from a public sector standpoint. And absolutely, I think that as we have densifying or any kind of growth happening, how do we do it in a planful way? How do we think about, for us, we're thinking about a district at one time instead of just parcel by parcel, building by building. We're trying to think about it across 4 parcels at a time. And how can we think about that stormwater management system in the middle of those 4 parcels? And how can we sort of then manage that as park space? So instead of just thinking about it as each distinct project, could you find opportunities to zoom out and think about where's our central goal? What is it, something that binds us together, whether it's a stormwater requirement, whether it's an idea for a park? Is there something that could, bond you together to give you a common goal? And then how do you cite that, physically? What does the funding look like? Who are the partners? I think starting to map out your strategy around developing something in a more collaborative approach those things take years. And I love I loved your question, just because it really gets my wheels turning on what does that look like in northern Minnesota. What does that look like in different communities? And I think we each have our own story, but I think we each have examples of that type of work.
Yeah, if I can jump in as well, Richard, I think it's a great question, and I think small communities are in such a great spot to really take advantage of all of the mistakes that big communities have maybe already made. And you think about all that we've learned about planning and infrastructure, and if your small community is going to grow, absolutely you want to take advantage of these new ideas of how to best grow to manage these sorts of issues and problems and resources. And even when you think about salt use on a road, if you understand that the ice builds up in certain areas where there's shade, and can you actually redesign a road so that it has more sunshine and the snow is managed in a way, and there's places for that snow to be placed that you don't need to use as much salt or ice, de-icing agents. And even that snow storage, like where it sits, can that be in a place where it's not going to pick up more pollutants and soak into the ground and recharge our aquifers and give us the benefits that way? And so all these sorts of little changes that you can build into a plan set before you build it can give you a huge advantage. And we build a road or a building once every 50 or 100 years, right? Once it's there for a long time. And so I think having that forethought to include these things now is enormous.
I just want to underline one thing that you said, John, and it's the importance of management long term of these spaces. And it's such a tricky thing. It's really tricky for us, and we have a big system with a lot of different stormwater BMPs or best management practices throughout. And we still will hire out outside consultants and contractors to help us manage our systems for stormwater management. They do require specialty equipment and training and awareness, and if we don't maintain them, they will fail. And so it's a critical part of, as we think about who's owning and operating it, but also what does the funding stream look like long term, is such a critical part of the sustainability of stormwater management and sustainability in a financial way too for communities.
Your question, Richard. It's inspiring to think about the ESMC Community Futures Project and some of the connections that are already being made with several communities within the round one applicants. Exciting to think about water being the tie for some potential collaboration. Water over man-made boundaries, maybe. Are there any other questions, comments, feedback from folks in the webinar group?
I could also jump in as folks are thinking about questions and just talk a little bit about funding. I mentioned the Mississippi Watershed Management Organization has been a great funder for bringing in stormwater management into our park system. We also have tools like the Park Dedication Ordinance, which I know is a tool used across different scales of communities all the way across the country. It's, I think, a 40-year-old tool for green space development. And that one is that when a new development occurs, whether if it's commercial or residential, they're building, developers will pay a fee per unit for that new development. And so in Minneapolis, it comes out to about $1,800 a unit if it's residential. And so when that stacks up and you've got 50 units in a building going in, they pay that fee upon pulling the building permit. And that goes into new parks and new park amenities. I know other systems, sometimes it's a little more flexible, like that could go to a public art program, or it might go to something within the street corridor. So, it does look a little bit different in every community, but it is something, it's a tool that is used across the state of Minnesota, and there is state statute support for it. It's definitely a politically sensitive tool because developers do pay for parkland and do pay for public assets. But we're grateful for it. We've just, I think, had it as a funding tool for the last 7 or so years and seen a lot of investment in parks as a result of it.
Joseph, go ahead.
Oh, hi, Tori. This is Tom Fisher and Carrie and John. Great work. Joseph and I are sitting here at our offices listening. I have less of a question, more just of an announcement. So I'm on the Minneapolis Foundation Board, and they are putting together a Minnesota meeting on October 7th related to water in Minnesota. And for everyone on this webinar who are interested in water issues, they're restarting this tradition we've had in the past called the Minnesota Meeting, which is to gather everybody in the state around a key issue. And water emerged as one of the most critically important issues for urban and rural communities. And so it's going to take place on October 7th from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. in the Nicollet Island Pavilion on Nicollet Island in the Mississippi River in Minneapolis, and it's open to the public. So everyone listening who's interested in water, I just wanted everyone to know that this will be an opportunity for all of us to get together and talk about the future of water in Minnesota.
Great. I just added MWMO and the Minneapolis Foundation event to the chat.
Maybe this is Tom again, maybe I'll ask a question. So, and maybe more to John, but Carrie, chime in too. So the university has been asked to develop a 50-year water plan for the state. And I didn't know how your organizations are involved and how you might personally be involved in that effort, but I think it also shows that there's an interest on the part of the legislature for developing a long-term strategy about how we keep our waterways clean and how we don't exhaust this vital resource. So any thoughts about that effort?
I guess I can lead off and say that the university has a lot of experts in water, and so there are a lot of different efforts that are going on, and there have been several different kind of plans, roadmaps, things that have been developed over the years. And I think, each one of these builds on other ones. So there's a lot of that happens. And I think it's a really important thing to have that long-term look. And we have to keep doing that to really understand if we're heading in the right direction and successfully, reaching our goals. And so I think that's about all the detail I can say on that. Plan that you mentioned. I don't have any specifics on it right now. I actually have not been involved with the one I think that you're talking about too much. I've been involved with other ones. So Carrie, I don't know if you've been involved with this 50-year water plan for Minnesota.
No, I haven't been, but I think the way we develop these plans, and I'm always curious to see what are the, what's the teeth in the plan and how are we monitoring the progress on the plan. And I think I know we are always working hard to identify data that's already being gathered and say, we're not, we want to actually monitor what we're up to. We may not be the best sort of data gathering as a park system, right? We build parks, we operate parks, but there's so much great data out there. How can we track the progress of our big regional goals through data partnerships? And it's something that I would just be curious about how that's showing up in a statewide plan. How do we build on the resources of the university and being such an asset with data? How do we build on other state efforts around data collection so that we and really look at it through the eye of, we want to hold ourselves accountable to these plans. We do all this great work and create these sort of proactive, welcoming spaces to think about the future, and that's so critical. But how do we make sure we keep looking at that plan and we're again holding ourselves accountable and communicating what those goals are to community, to municipalities, rippling it down into the doers. So just a few sort of questions and excitement to see what becomes of that plan.
One thing that I want to add is Minnesota and Minnesotans should really take pride in their water and their water quality and their stormwater management. I think nationally across this country, Minnesota is seen as one of the leaders in stormwater, and we have recently been awarded Minnesota as part of a Stormwater Center for Excellence. It's a thing that the federal government established 4 different centers around the country, and we partnered with University of New Hampshire to become one of those centers. And when we look at the manuals and the guidance and the science and the research, Minnesota is one of the leaders in it. So when you think about what we're doing and what we're planning to do, I think as Minnesotans, you should be proud of all of the successes that we've had here.
One thing that's really standing out for me about your presentation, John, was that you started with just a downspout from an individual home, and that has an impact. It truly does. I mean, that stormwater management is one of the most scalable environmental and public health practices. It's an incredibly scalable tool and sort of mindset. So I find that exciting too in the context of smaller community planning and thinking.
Go ahead, Ursula.
Hi, I'm Ursula Lang, staff researcher at MDC, and thank you both. These were such great presentations. I was wondering, maybe for Carrie, but also John, if you have something that comes to mind. I was curious what some of the most sort of surprising elements of the Towerside Park project there were, and how that might or might not relate to kind of community planning, social connections, and so on. Thanks.
Thanks, Ursula. Nice to see you, hear you. I think one of the interesting things with the Towerside Innovation District park planning is that stormwater approach actually, if we look behind the scenes on that, it's like a 60-page partnership document. There is so much behind what kind of goes into forming a partnership like that. So each of those property owners does pay into a maintenance fund, and the underlying land holder or the actual infrastructure is one entity, or the underlying sort of owner of the infrastructure is one entity, the underlying landowner is another, and the partnership includes all of those things. And that 60-page document took probably 2 years for them all to develop, and that was even, some of them were building buildings, some of them had just bought land, and it was but the amount of work and hours that went into that is incredible. And I think it's also an incredible example of working collectively in a very sort of capitalistic model. I mean, it's real estate development in our urban core. And I think it's a really interesting example, and it certainly is out there publicly if folks are interested in diving into the what's reading between the lines of this interesting project.
And I'll just chime in and say one of the things that I really like about the Towerside project is exactly what Carrie was just talking about. It's the coming together of all these different aspects. And I think stormwater is something that touches so many people in so many different ways that it's really a thing that can do that. I think about other projects where it's, near my house, there's a treatment system underneath one of the roads. You can't see it. It's underground. There's really nothing to celebrate at that site. But Towerside has the community gardens and all these other features, and the stormwater is celebrated as something to see and observe and interact with. And I think that's where some of the beauty and the magic comes into some of the really neat projects.
I agree. It's a very fun place to experience, and have been to that site to draw a lot because there are all of these interesting species that are popping up, and it just looks completely different at different times of year. So it's fun to be able to observe that change. Mary, did you have a question?
Yes, I did. Thank you, Carrie and John, for excellent presentation. Really enjoyed it. I'm wondering, are there any feelers out to the affordable housing community? You mentioned the issue of per unit contributions to the stormwater effort. And affordable housing is an extraordinarily important issue throughout the state, and particularly in greater Minnesota. And so are there any strategies to have affordable housing with stormwater amenities, but not stormwater fees?
Yeah, great question. And I will jump in and just note that actually the stormwater or the park dedication fee tool that I mentioned it's a concurrent ordinance between the city of Minneapolis and the park board. Actually, affordable housing is exempt from those fees. And I also want to just clarify that the fees are not paid by the residents, but they are paid by the building developer. However, and that does still transfer into sometimes more expensive buildings when there's additional fees stacked on top of an already really challenging construction industry. And I know that affordable housing financing structures are so complex, and kudos to any communities that are figuring those puzzles out. And I agree that, we are in a housing crisis crisis, and just like we are in a, environmental crisis. And so how do we hold both of those? And so for us, one of the easy ways to do that was just to say we're going to exempt affordable housing from needing to pay those fees.
Thank you.
Thanks for your question, Mary. Well, we are about at time. I want to thank everyone for being here and engaging with such thoughtful questions, and especially to Carrie and John for addressing this topic. There's so much to chew on here, and we're really pleased to have you as part of this program. So thank you so much. Feel free to find out more about ESMC on the website. The link is in the chat. And then there are a couple of other links to Mississippi Watershed Management Organization and the Minneapolis Foundation event as well. So thanks all, and we hope to see you at our second one in October.
Thank you, Tori. Thank you, John and Carrie.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks
Bye.
all.
Thank you.